Hello, and welcome to AskGAOLive, the U.S. Government Accountability Office's live video chat program. My name is Jacques Arsenault, and I'm in GAO's Office of Public Affairs, and I'm joined today by Charles Jeszeck, a director in our Education, Workforce, and Income Security team. Thanks for joining me today, Charlie.
Oh, thanks, Jacques. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great. Charlie's team recently put out a report on Americans' retirement savings, and if you want to read that full report, you can find it at GAO-15-419. But we'll have a chance to talk through that over the course of this chat over the next half hour. I want to remind folks we've already received a number of questions over email as well as on Twitter, and if you'd like to submit your own question, you can do that via email by emailing askgaolive@gao.gov or on Twitter using the hashtag AskGAOLive. We'll try to get through as many of your questions as we can today. So turning to you, Charlie, can you talk a little bit about this report, what you looked at and what you found?
Well, basically, one of the main things we did was we examined data from the Federal Reserve, the Survey of Consumer Finances, to look at the assets of older Americans have in preparation for retirement. And so we were breaking it out by different types of assets. And the bottom line is, that, at least for the data themselves, the numbers don't look too encouraging.
Sure. And on those numbers, I know you have a slide. I believe it's figure 1. Can you tell us what this figure, I believe it's figure 1, says about the assets of? Well,
basically, we found that for people, households over age 55, that only 48% had some retirement savings, i.e. something either in a 401k type plan or a defined contribution plan or an IRA. We found that 29% frankly had, not only did they have no traditional pension, but they had no retirement savings. Basically, they had nothing ready, any assets earmarked for retirement. So that's it's almost a third of American households in that age group.
Sure. Well, turning to that question in particular, we got a question from Mary over email, and Mary says she's 60 and her husband is 66, and they're both working, and she wants to know how much they should consider, how much they'll need to be able to retire.
Well, see, this is one of the interesting things. There's a consensus among experts about the data. I mean, people don't disagree with the data that we presented in the report. Where there is a lot of disagreement is over how much someone exactly needs for retirement. It depends on, and it takes into account, you have to look at a lot of different variables, and no household, very few households are, all of them have unique factors that may affect the amount that they need for retirement. So for example, if you're not very healthy, you're likely going to need more income in retirement, to take care of those health issues, but also the fact that you're not going to be able to work. If, for example, you have adult children who are still living with you, and then they sort of move out, while you're entering retirement, you might actually have almost a windfall and actually be able to weather retirement more easily. On the other hand, if you have a shock like a divorce or a death, or again a health issue that could have a real adverse effect on your retirement. So there's really no. There's a lot of different standards. Experts are divided over how much you need. People talk about a replacement rate, which is how much you of your last year or period, years of last years that you're working, how much of that you'll need in retirement. And experts disagree on what that percentage should be.
Mm-hmm. So there's no magic number? No,
there's no magic number. Everybody's different, and it also it's hard. It's a difficult issue.
Sure. We got another question. This came from Chris on Twitter, and he wanted to know, it's not particularly focused on retirement, but he says if he saves enough for retirement, does he have to worry about health coverage? Will his employer, and it sounds like he's from the federal government, but will his employer cover health benefits?
Well, for the federal government, it's still one of the few employers that provides retiree health care. A lot of state and local government employers do that as well. In the private sector, a lot of retirement has disappeared for all practical purposes. Now, once you hit age 65, you're eligible for Medicare. So Medicare is a major protection. And then you can buy supplemental insurance to sort of plug some of the holes that Medicare doesn't take care of. Now, if you retire before age 65, we do have the Affordable Care Act, and people you can sign up for insurance through one of the exchanges. So that actually is a big difference between now and say prior to the Affordable Care Act, where if you retired prior to Medicare, if you didn't have retiree health insurance, you probably have to get either pay out of pocket or get another job that provided health insurance.
Sure. Well, coming along that area, you talked about Medicare being one of those places that can support part of some retirement expenses. And I think there's another figure up, figure 2, that looks at that question of what are, if people don't have savings, where are they looking, and where is their retirement income coming from? Can you talk a little bit about this?
Well, this chart, too, this is for people actually who are between the ages of 65 to 74. Mm-hmm. So they're already drawing down some of their retirement savings if they have any. And so if you look at the left, that pie shows for those people, and it's about 29% of all the households in this group, with no retirement savings at all, sort of where they get their income. And as you might imagine, for this group, that Social Security is going to provide the bulk of the income. It's really the bedrock. It sounds like a cliche, but Social Security remains the bedrock of retirement security for people in America. So as you can see on the left side, that's the bulk of where income comes from. Some also comes from working. Some comes from other non-retirement assets. People might have they might own some stock or have some other asset that they use there. And so there's also, for this group, there's still a considerable number of people who have traditional pensions. So that's where it comes from. Some of it, as we have up there, is from public assistance, and this is things like SSI and TANF and so on, but it's a comparatively small amount.
Sure. So can we pull back a little bit and just talk about, because I know your report talked about traditional pensions versus IRAs, and can you give kind of the treetop level view of what the difference is and sort of what difference it makes for people's retirement?
Yeah, you can think of a traditional pension or a defined pension plan as basically that when you retire, your employer actually is required by law to offer you a monthly benefit until you die, and so that's something that stretches out over the period. You don't have to worry about you outliving your income or anything like that. And so that's something that you just do. You don't have to manage the money. The check comes in every month. This still exists in some large companies in the private sector and some unionized sectors like construction and so on, as well as in the public sector. And in general, though, those pensions are disappearing. And what's replacing them has been an account-based pension, a 401k type, where you have an account and it builds up money over time, and the employer and the participant or the employee make contributions to that. And then when you're about to retire, then you have to figure out what to do with that lump sum of money. Either take the lump sum, you can purchase an annuity, which is a stream of payments that you'd have again until you die. Or you can draw it down on your own, say you're going to take a certain amount of money out each month and try to make the money last for the remainder of your life. And there are different financial advisors, other people can give you different strategies for doing that.
Sure. But it sounds like it introduces a little more uncertainty versus the...
Oh, absolutely. Mm-hmm. I mean, you don't, because you don't know when you're going to die, you don't know if the strategy that you're taking, given uncertainties of the financial markets and health and all these other things, all these other risks that we've talked about. There's the risk of you outliving your money and being quite elderly and not have any more of those savings and having only Social Security, or actually dying prematurely and leaving a whole lot of money just on the table.
Sure. Well, we've had a lot of questions come in that people are asking sort of how much they need to save. Should I save 20% of my salary? Should I save this? And I know that wasn't really something that your report got into, but are there any resources or general things or questions people should be asking themselves when it comes to figuring out how much they're going to need to save?
Well, again, it is hard to. I would say, just in general, at the very least, if you If you have an employer that provides a retirement savings plan, and not all employers do. In fact, we know that at any one time, probably close to 50% of the private sector workforce works for an employer that doesn't offer a plan. But if they do, the very least, you should participate in that plan. Increasingly, a lot of employers have automatic enrollment, so people sort of are automatically contributing to the plan. If you are contributing to the plan, at the very least, you should contribute to the point to get the full employer match. A lot of employers will match your own contributions to a certain degree. Like, for example, the first 6% of your own contribution, the employer may put 3% in or 4% in. You want to definitely get to that 6% to maximize to take full advantage of the employer contribution. So those, I think, are the easy things to do. And of course, I think particularly if you're younger, the more you can contribute, the better off you are. To get to take advantage of of a longer time horizon and the increased compounding that can occur from that.
Sure. On that note, you said that some employers do offer IRA programs, but as many as 50% maybe do not. We got an email from Ann who said several states are setting up their own IRA programs that larger businesses or businesses with a certain number of employees can buy into. Can you talk about any pros and cons of that sort of situation?
Well, actually, we're conducting work looking explicitly at that issue right now for Senator Murray, who is the ranking minority member of the Senate Help Committee. So I really can't talk too much about that. But it is something a lot of states throughout the country are taking a look at this. There is an acknowledgement that it's pretty well-known statistic over many years. There are a lot of workers who work for employers who don't have access to a retirement savings plan. And so the extent that the states are thinking that if they can encourage more saving, not only it will help people have a more secure retirement, but also for themselves, it could create less stress on any sort of social safety nets that those states provide to citizens in their state.
Sure. So
this is an area, there is a lot of interest among states throughout the country in doing something in this regard.
Sure. All right. Well, we have another question that came in over email from Charlotte. And Charlotte says everyone in her office has a 401k or an IRA. And so she's having a hard time understanding how there is such a problem with people not saving in this country.
Well, first of all, we know that a lot of people don't have them. We know that at any one time people may not have access to a plan. Second of all, we've done work several years ago where we found that when people sometimes when people move from employers, they don't realize that they have an account. In fact, today I was just talking with someone who essentially it happened, if you have a small account, it goes into these so-called force-out accounts with very high fees, and if you don't realize that you have this, in a few years that money could be lost. So there is that issue. But I think first thing, there's coverage. Second of all, it's important to keep in mind that the 401k plans, when they were initially developed, were really not designed at the time to be primary retirement plans. They were supplemental to a traditional pension. And so now that they've had to really sort of assume the role as the primary account, saving in them has become more important than ever. Now, why don't people save more? Well, I think there's a couple of reasons. One, I mean, probably the main thing, and a lot of researchers, and this is really outside the scope of our report, but a lot of researchers have looked at this, is that there hasn't been a lot of growth in wages in the United States for the last several decades. We know that there's other things like the cost of education and mortgages and all of that have increased. Student loans now. Student loan debt recently has passed credit card debt in terms of the amount of indebtedness in the United States. All these demands on an account, on an income that isn't growing, makes it difficult for people to save for retirement, particularly when they have more immediate goals like paying off student loan debt or buying a house or paying for their children, the cost of having children, and yet saving for retirement seems so far off in the future. So it can be very challenging for a lot of people.
Sure. Well, I want to take a moment to remind our viewers that you can send your questions. If we haven't addressed your particular question, you can send your questions in via email at AskGAOLive, and we'll get to as many as we can. That's AskGAOLive@gao.gov, or on Twitter, you can just tweet them using hashtag AskGAOLive. So I wanted to get Charlie at something, and we have about 15 more minutes, so we'll get through hopefully some more questions from the audience, as well as I wanted to touch on a couple of things that you were talking about before. And one thing that you said was that people's retirement kind of, not only is there not a magic number, but that people may not know what their expenses are going to be. They may not know. And so I know one thing that people have talked about is, some people say, well, I'm going to work forever. I'm just going to work and I don't have to worry about retirement because I'll just draw a paycheck as long as I can. And I know that you looked a little bit at what those behaviors actually look like in your report, and we have a figure 3 on that. Can you take us through what this figure?
Yeah, one of the things that we found, on one hand, when we talked to, we looked at the survey data, and a lot of people said that actually in retirement that they're okay, that they're doing fine. But one of the interesting things we found is that if you talk to people pre-retirement and you ask them what they expect to do, a lot of them underestimate when they're going to retire. So, for example, if you talk to people prior to retirement, only about 2% of them say, "Oh, I'm going to retire before age 60." And obviously, these are workers between over 55 and over. But then, if you look after when they retired, in fact, 36% of them, over a third, retired before age 60. And so if you look at a lot of these things, some people say, I'm never going to retire. And obviously a lot of people do, or people are going to continue to work. And in fact, when they actually get to those older ages, in fact, their expectations, they're not matching with their actions. And there could be a lot of reasons for this. Certainly health, again, is, even though people are living longer and are healthier today, still health shocks can be a major determinant on whether you're able to continue to work. There are we've seen some cases where sometimes some of these surveys, people feel that they're being pushed out of work, that their employers want them to move on. So a lot of things can happen that actually may make these their previous plans not to come to fruition.
Sure. And just to be clear, it looks like this was not that the same people were surveyed at age 55 and then later, but it is very clear that what the 55-year-olds said they expected to do is very different from what the current retirees have done. Right. Sure. Okay, getting back to another question from our audience. And this looks like it came up from what you were talking about earlier. You had mentioned annuities, and Randy over email has been saving for retirement, and with retirement coming up, wanted to know a little bit more about sort of what is an annuity and what might be the pros and cons there.
Well, an annuity is a lifetime stream of income. It's where you take a certain amount of money, and typically you may go to an insurance company and you give them the amount of money, $100,000, and then the insurance company agrees to pay a certain amount of money to you monthly until you're deceased. And so you can think of it's almost sort of like a mortgage, only you're like the lender rather than the people paying the mortgage. And so that solves the problem of outliving your income, because as long as you live, you're going to continue to get this amount of money, the agreed upon amount of monthly income. So when you die, then it's all gone. Now, so that takes off the table a particularly important risk called the longevity risk. Now, of course, in most instances, these annuities are not inflation indexed. And so you're still vulnerable to inflation. So that's a concern. Now in some cases you are able to buy an inflation indexed annuity, so you can correct for that, but of course those are more expensive. But anyway, this is something that increasingly now, and I think a lot of experts in the retirement community are focusing, have a concern with ensuring a stream of lifetime income. There's a concern that as people with 401ks and they have these large lump sums approach retirement, that you want to make sure that they're able to have that, not outlive that income. And so there really is an interest not only in the financial community providing new products, but also in the federal government. There's been some regulatory changes on the part of the Treasury and the Department of Labor to facilitate participants having access to ways to extend their income for the duration of their lives.
All right, great. We have a couple of questions that came in specifically about homes. And one person said that they bought their home in the 70s and it's now worth a lot more money, and is that enough to fund retirement? And somebody else, Melanie, says she keeps telling her kids to buy a house, and that can be a good sort of bulwark for retirement. Is that something that that you found in your work, or I know that's something that I have heard every once in a while from relatives saying, "Why are you still renting?"
Well, we did find that for people with no retirement savings, they typically were less likely to have a home as well.
Okay.
So, I mean, they did have less debt, but even so, they were less likely to have a home. So that didn't really help those people. Again, it depends individual circumstances. It sounds like somebody who was able to buy a home in the 1970s and keep it up, that they probably have gotten quite a rate of return on that. And depending, I don't know, all the other factors that could be a major piece to their solution to having a secure retirement.
Sure.
Whether everybody should buy a home, not everyone can. And then again, it comes down to, and not everyone really should. It comes down to, again, your personal circumstances, just a whole host of things, what you do in your life, how much you move around, all sorts of stuff. It certainly can be helpful. Having housing can be an important retirement income asset. You can sell it and then move down to a smaller place. Increasingly, there are these reverse mortgages. That market still, I believe, is really quite small. So it's obviously another asset that you can draw upon, and it can be helpful.
Sure. So we have an email that just came in from Paul, and Paul says that speakers at pre-retirement seminars that he's been to say that retirement is going to be much more costly than you can possibly imagine, and so you should work at your job as long as you're physically able to. And he wants to know, is this grounded in fact, or is it just sort of an advisor trying to sell something?
Well, again, it depends on how much you have, what assets, how much financial resources you have going into retirement. If you look at the average for people with retirement savings, I think we found it was people age 55 to 64, I think they had $110,000. I think if at age 65 that turns out to be an annuity, I think an inflation-adjusted annuity of $400 a month or something. Is that a lot or a little? It doesn't seem like a whole lot, but for some people it could make the difference. And again, you have to look at the whole situation of the individuals, what resources they have, what was their previous standard of living, how healthy they are. So if you have been saving, one of the things we did find, and this is for people between the ages of 65 and 74, for the higher income people who had saved a lot, they actually they had this is for the people who actually had retirement savings. The top 10%, the median amount in their account was over $1 million. So these people were actually doing quite well. So again, it comes down to how much have you been saving for retirement, how well is it doing, and when do you want a retirement, and what are all the other key features of your personal situation.
Sure. Well, you may have just answered this with the last question, but Mark wants to know, did anything that you found in this report surprise you or surprise your team?
Well, I think one of the things we did find, there have been a lot of numbers put out there about how, a lot of people are in trouble, the retirement crisis, and you look at the numbers, and the basic numbers for a lot of people don't look all that good, frankly. However, there are a group of people, this 10%, this highest decile, who actually seem to be doing quite well, that the system seems to be working for them. They're taking account the defined contribution limits, the maximum of the limits, they're putting a lot of money in. They seem to be doing quite well, and I was actually a little bit surprised at how well some people were doing. But this, frankly, this is the top 10%. This is not the this is certainly not the median person, the median household.
Sure. So it sounds like for that group of people, things are looking, certainly better off. We've had a couple of different questions that have come in, and I'll read one of them from Emily. She says, "It can't be this bad. Is there any good news, or does everything point to a grim retirement outlook?" And maybe putting aside those 10%, what?
Well, I think what it does mean is that people are going to have to save. I mean, they really somewhere, or somewhere retirement income is going to have to, it's got to come from somewhere. And again, there is a real debate on whether how bad, is it really, and what replacement rate should you use. But even the most optimistic studies still have a number of households that are pretty much going to have to rely upon Social Security. And so as their overwhelming source of income, they're not going to have anything except for that. Social Security was never intended to be, really to be a major source of income like that, ignoring everything else. So I think that is a real problem. There are things people are talking about. We do have a lot of activity among the states right now about looking at some issues. There have been some, idea. There are a lot of innovative products that the financial services industry is thinking about. There have been proposals, in fact, to increase Social Security benefits. So there are things that people are talking about out there that can improve retirement security. So even if you think that the current system is, by and large, working for a whole lot of people, there are still things that you can do to make it better. Sure. And frankly, there are a lot of people who really could use some help.
Sure. We only have a few minutes left, so I wanted to ask, you touched on this a little bit, but what are some of the implications from this report for the federal government? What are some of the policy concerns or considerations? And you mentioned Social Security just now.
Well, clearly the first thing is Social Security remains the bedrock of retirement security for people in this country, and particularly lower income people. And now the program is facing some long-term financial issues. I think in the early 2030s, the old age account will deplete its assets. And what that means is that they'll only be able to pay 75% of the promised benefits, which actually will still be higher than what people get today because of rising wages over that period. So there are some issues there that will have to be addressed. But it really does show how important that is. And frankly, those issues can be addressed in a lot of ways. A lot of people, we know what to do on Social Security. There really is just a question of a political will to take some action.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So then finally, what would you say was the bottom line of this report?
Well, I think the bottom line is you look at the numbers. I think just objectively, you look at a lot of the numbers, they don't look all that great. The question does become, like, how bad does it look like? There are some people who are pretty optimistic and say, by and large, for most people, things are going to be okay. And yeah, there are a few people who aren't, are going to be in trouble, and they still have Social Security. And you have other people say, well, no, I think for a lot of people, if you look at the median households, and from their analysis, that there are going to be a lot of people who are going to face some significant problems in the future, particularly those who have health issues, and also, depending on what happens in the market, how they invest their money, and so on. So I think the bottom line is, GAO. I think we did typically what we like to do. We like to put out fair and objective numbers, and let those numbers speak for themselves. And we also try to present both sides of the case in terms of whether they're, to what degree is there a crisis in retirement income or not.
Sure. Well, I'd like to thank you again, Charlie, for taking the time to chat with us today.
That's my pleasure.
Great. And I'd like to thank all of those who joined us and sent in your questions and heard from Charlie. Again, if you'd like to read Charlie's team's full report, you can find that at GAO.gov. Search for report number GAO-15-419. And we also invite you to connect with us in other ways. You can connect with GAO on Twitter. We're at twitter.com/USGAO. We're also on Facebook, facebook.com/USGAO. We have our GAO Watch blog, which you can find at blog.gao.gov. We're also on LinkedIn, and we have resources available on Flickr and here on YouTube as well. So we encourage you to connect with us. We hope that you found this to be valuable, and we encourage you to tune in next time for Ask GAO Live.